The 5 Orange Pips. Sherlock Holmes solved so many strange and interesting cases between 82 and 90, but none of them present such strange circumstances as I now take up my pen to describe. It was a stormy September night, when Holmes and I sat on either side of the fireplace, both engrossed in reading. Suddenly I heard the front bell ring.
"It must be a serious case. Nothing less would bring a man out on such a night,"
observed Holmes. The man who came in was young, about 22, well-dressed and with refinement in his bearing. He held a streaming umbrella and wore a waterproof cloak. He looked pale and anxious. The young man apologized for bringing in rain and storm into the room.
"I have come for advice. Major Prendergast told me that you can solve anything."
"It is true that I have been generally successful,"
admitted Holmes.
"Give me the details of your case."
"My name is John Openshaw. My father Joseph had a small factory in Coventry, which he enlarged at the time of the bicycle. He was successful and retired with a comfortable income after selling his factory. My father's brother Elias emigrated to America when he was young. He fought in the Jackson's army and later rose to be a colonel. When Lee surrendered, he came back to his plantation and stayed there for 3 to 4 years. In 1869 or 1870, he came back to England and bought a small estate in Sussex near Horsham. His dislike of Negroes and the Republican policy in giving them freedom made him leave the States. He had a fiery temper and became aggressive when angry. He kept to himself, had no friends, and did not meet even his brother. But he was fond of me. When I was 12 or so, he begged my father to let me live with him. He taught me to play backgammon and draughts, and made me carry orders to his servants and tradesmen. By 16, I became the master of his house and kept all his keys. I was allowed everywhere except a single room in the attic. No one was allowed to enter this room. I tried to peep through the keyhole, but never saw anything except old trunk and bundles. One day in March 1883, my uncle received a letter with a foreign postmark. It was from Pondicherry, and when he opened it, out jumped 5 dried orange pips, which pattered down upon his plate. I had begun to laugh, but a look on his face stopped me. It was Ashton.
"Go!"
He shrieked.
My God, my sins have overtaken me."
"What is it, Uncle?" I cried.
"Death,"
said he, and left the room. I met him coming down the room with an old rusty key in one hand and one small box in the other. He ordered me to call his Horsham lawyer. When the lawyer came, he asked me to witness his will. He left his entire estate to my father, which would ultimately come to me. Then he said a strange thing.
"If you enjoy my estate in peace, well and good. If you find you cannot, then, my boy, leave it to your deadliest enemy."
I saw the box he had carried earlier lying on the table, open and empty. I was surprised to see the treble K printed on the lid. There were ashes on some burned paper in the grate. I signed the paper as directed. My uncle changed from that day, drank more and more, carried a revolver, and kept himself locked for most of the time. To cut my story short, there came a night when he went out and never came back. We found him lying face downward in a pool near the foot of the garden. There was no mark of violence on him, and the water in the pool was only 2 feet. The police gave the verdict of suicide. My father became the owner of the estate and £14,000 which were in his name in the bank.
Holmes interrupted the young man to know some specific dates.
The letter arrived on March 10, 1883. My uncle died 7 weeks later on the night of May 2nd, answered the young man. My father came to live at Horsham, and nothing happened till January 85. Then we were having breakfast together one day when my father gave a sharp cry. He had an open envelope in one hand and 5 dried orange pips in the other. KKK was written inside the envelope. Put the papers on the sundial was also written above the initials. I read the postmark of Dundee. I told my father that the papers must be the one my uncle destroyed. We had found nothing in the attic when we searched it after his death. My father laughed and thought it was a joke and stopped me from going to the police. On the 3rd day after receiving the letter, my father went to meet a friend of his, Major Peabody. He did not return that day. The very next day, I received a telegram from the Major imploring me to come at once to Portsdown Hill. My father had fallen over one of the deep chalk pits which were abound in that place. He was lying dead with a broken skull. There were no signs of violence on him, and the jury gave the verdict, death from accidental causes. In this sinister way, I came into my inheritance. My father died in January 85, and 2 years and 8 months have passed since then. I thought the curse had passed away, till this blow came 2 days ago.
The young man took out a crumpled envelope from his pocket, and he shook out 5 dried orange pips. The postmark was London, and the same message, KKK, and then put the paper on the sundial. Holmes asked him what he had done in 2 days. The young man said that he had gone to the police, but they listened to him with a smile. They posted a policeman near his house. The young man gave a discolored blue-tinted paper, which he had found on the floor of his uncle's room. Holmes moved the lamp, and we both bent over the paper. It was headed March 1869, and under it were the following notices. 4th, Hudson came, same old platform. 7th, set the pips on Macaulay, Paramore, and John Swain of St. Augustine. 9th, Macaulay cleared. 10th, John Swain cleared. 12th, visited Paramore, all well.
Thank you,
said Holmes, and returned the paper to the young man.
You must now go home immediately. Put his paper in the brass box which your uncle had. Write a note that all the papers were burnt except this, and then put the box upon the sundial. Do not lose an instant, and take care of yourself. Your life is in danger.
The young man told us that he would go back by train from Waterloo, and that he was armed. He promised to contact us in a day or 2.
Did you mark the postmarks of these letters?
Holmes asked me as soon as the young man left.
The first was from Pondicherry, the second from Dundee, and the third from East London. They're all seaports. The writer is on board of a ship. In the first case, 7 weeks elapsed between the threat and the killing. In Dundee it was only 3 or 4 days. Now do you see the urgency for young Openshaw? His letter came from London.
Good God, I cried. What does this mean?
The papers which Openshaw carried are obviously of vital importance to the person or the persons in the sailing ship. There must be more than one of them. Do you know KKK? It stands for a society in America, Ku Klux Klan.
I've never heard of it. Holmes told me it was a terrible society formed by some ex-Confederate soldiers in the southern states after the Civil War. Its power was used for terrorizing the Negro voters and murdering and driving out those who were opposed to its views. They always just gave a warning, melon seeds or orange pips. The choice for the victim was to leave the country or give up his ways, otherwise sure death followed. It succeeded for several years till 1869 when it suddenly collapsed. The collapse of the society coincided with the disappearance of Openshaw from America. Holmes then told me to rest, as we could not do anything that night, and prayed for young Openshaw's safety. Next morning I found Holmes having breakfast and getting ready to leave for London. He asked me to ring for the coffee. I picked up the morning newspaper and shocking news met my eye. "Holmes," I cried, "you're too late." I showed him the headline. It read, "Tragedy near Waterloo Bridge." A police constable on duty near the bridge heard a cry for help and a splash in the water. With the help of several people, a body was recovered. From an envelope in his pocket, it appeared that the young gentleman was John Openshaw of Horsham. It was guessed that in a hurry to catch the train from Waterloo Station, he missed his path and fell from one of the landing places meant for river steamboats. No doubt it was an accident. Holmes was shaken and depressed.
"They must be cunning devils. I shall not leave them."
And he left. I went to his home at Baker Street late in the evening. At about 10 o'clock in the night, Sherlock Holmes returned home. He first ate hungrily and then took an orange from the cupboard, took out 5 pips and put them in an envelope. On the inside of the flap he wrote S.H. for J.O. and sealed it. He addressed it to Captain James Calhoun, Bark Lone Star, Savannah, Georgia.
"That will await him when he enters port,"
Holmes said, chuckling.
"It may give him a sleepless night."
"Who is this Captain Calhoun?" I asked.
"The leader of the gang. I shall have the others, but he first."
He took out a large sheet from his pocket, all covered with dates and names. He had been busy following the career of every ship which touched Pondicherry in January 83. Lone Star caught his attention from the 36 ships because Texas is called Lone Star and had an American origin. Then he searched the record of Dundee, and sure enough, Lone Star was there in January 85. Then it was easy to find out that Lone Star reached London only last week. My suspicion was confirmed. When Holmes went to Albert Dock, he found it had left the port, homeward bound to Savannah. There were 3 Americans on it, and they were all away from the ship last night. This he found out from the stevedore, who had been loading their cargo.
"Before they reach Savannah, my letter and a cable will have informed the police of Savannah that those 3 gentlemen are badly wanted in London upon a charge of murder."
There is always a flaw, however, in the best-laid human plans. The murderers of John Openshaw never received the orange pips. The Lone Star never reached Savannah. No news ever reached us about it. We did at last hear that somewhere far out in the Atlantic, a shattered sternpost of the boat was seen swinging in the trough of a wave, with the letter L.S. carved upon it. And that is all we shall ever know of the fate of Lone Star.